Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Hamid Adamu and today I welcome you to the most comprehensive CSS Grid crash course you will find anywhere. If you have been struggling with layouts, trying to center things or make responsive designs, today everything changes. So with CSS Grid, I think it's hands down the most powerful layout system in CSS. And I'm going to teach you everything you need to know from absolute beginner to confident grid master. In today's video, we are covering everything: what CSS grid is, how to create grids, position items, make responsive layouts, alignment, spacing, and all the essential techniques you need. But don't worry, I'll explain everything in simple terms with plenty of examples. Here is what makes this comprehensive. We are not just scratching the surface. You will understand every important CSS grid concept by the end of this video. Then over the next few days, I've got two amazing project-based tutorials where we will use everything we learned today to build real websites. And we will wrap it all up with a video that combines CSS grid and responsive design. This is going to be true practical and incredibly valuable. So without wasting much time, grab VS Code and let's master CSS grid together. Alright, let me start by explaining what CSS grid is and why it's such a game changer. So CSS Grid is a two-dimensional layout system that lets you create complex layouts using rows and columns. Think of it like creating a table structure, but with superpowers. You can overlap items, create responsive layouts, and have complete control over positioning. So why is CSS Grid amazing? CSS Grid is two-dimensional. You can work with both rows and columns simultaneously. It also has clean HTML. No more wrapper divs and layout hacks. And it's also responsive by nature. So it has built-in responsiveness without complex media queries. It's also precise positioning. So you can place items exactly where you want them, right? We can create professional layouts too, like magazine style and complex layouts easily. So let me start with the basic concepts. Okay, let's add some HTML first. So here inside my VS Code, I have these two files, HTML and CSS, as always. So let me add a div with the class of grid container. It's just like Flexbox actually, in some ways, right? So grid container, I'm going to include 4 items inside. So let's say grid item, number sign times 4. So this will generate four child elements for the grid container, right? Now let's create our first grid. So let's go to our CSS and target the grid container. Okay, so like this, grid container. Okay, so the most powerful property in CSS grid is the display grid, which turns our div into a grid container, right? So like this, display grid, and that's all. Now let's create two equal columns using fractional units, right? So let's say it has this property for defining columns. So let's say grid template columns 1 fr 1 fr. Okay, can you see that? Actually, let me style those items so that we can see things clearly. Okay, so grid item, they all have a class of grid item, right? Let me give it a padding of 1 rem, background of slate blue, right? Color of white, and then what am I going to add? Let's say font size 2 rem. I think that's too big, so let's say 1.4 maybe. Yeah, okay. So right now, this is our container, right? So as you can see, it's now created 2 columns for us. So the one FR means one fraction of available space. So we get 2 equal columns here, right? Let's add some spacing between our items. So CSS Grid have this property called gap, right? Grid gap. And so you can say you can define the row gap. Let's say 20 pixels actually. Can you see that? So it now creates a gap between the rows. And we also have the column gap like this. Okay, can you see that? So this works horizontally and this works vertically. Okay, but it has a shorthand property that can do it all in one go, which is the gap property. So if you just say gap 20 pixels, all right, you can see it does the same job as the other two, right? Now let's style our items. Okay, actually I'm going to give this, let me add some styles to this, to our items. So I'm going to center the text. Okay, and also I'm going to add let's say border radius of 8 pixels. Okay, there you go. And there we have it, a perfect 2 times 2 grid with just a few lines of CSS. So two columns and 2 rows, right? Okay, now let's explore all the fundamental properties you can use on grid containers. Now let me comment out this one, the first example here. I'm going to create a new example. So let's say uh, let me name this basic grid. Okay, and I'm going to create like 6 divs actually. So just like this. Okay, now let's get back to our CSS. Now let me target our basic grid. So this one right here, the container. Okay, let's make it a grid container. Actually, there's something I wanted to show you. I even forgot. So we have I've never shown you about browser dev tools before actually, but I think I'm going to create a different video for that, just like we did with custom fonts and this thing. I'm going to create a separate video for that. Okay, so you just right click and then click inspect. Okay, so there you can see the contents of the whole website. So this is our HTML, right? Okay, so right now what we are interested in is the layout. Where is the layout actually? Okay, here it is. So this one. Okay, so you can work with, you can see it has the grid and the flex layout, right? So right here we can come and choose this basic grid overlay. Okay, we can decide to turn it on from here, and you can also find it in our CSS. So you can see this little grid icon here. So just click on it and you can see it now highlights all our boxes, right? So this helps us know what we are working with, right? So the columns and the rows and column numbers and stuff like that. It will make sense when we start doing this thing. So spanning across multiple elements. Okay. So for now, let's just focus on it. Okay, so instead of we also have this thing inline grid actually. So if you want the container to behave like an inline element, but 99% of the time you will use display grid actually. Okay, there is inline grid. Okay, we have inline grids like this. Can you see that? But actually it's not used. I've never seen someone use it before in real life. Okay, now let's create three equal columns using fractional units. Okay, so the FR units. So right now, in order to create columns, so instead of writing them like this, okay, so as you can see we have three columns, right? We have three equal columns, but we can also do it this way. So instead of writing them manual like this, we have this function called repeat. So you just define how many columns you want to define, and then you define the size. Okay, you see this, it does the same job, right? So as you can see, it's cleaner, right? So this does exactly the same thing, but it's much cleaner when you have many columns. Now let's try using fixed pixel widths for our grids instead of fractional units. Okay, now let's say grid template columns. So I like to write GTC actually. So grid template columns, 200 pixels, 100 pixels. Can you see that? 300 pixels. Okay. So each column has a specific width in pixels, right? We can also mix units for flexible layouts. So we can say like 200 pixels, right? 1 FR and 100 pixels. Okay. So this gives us fixed sidebars with a flexible middle column, right? So this is super useful for layouts. So the fraction unit will take up whatever space that is remaining, that is left by the other columns. Okay, so we can also use auto to size columns to their content. Okay, so you can say, actually let me comment it out for reference purposes. So 1FR auto. Okay, can you see that? Actually, let me style them too, so that we see what we are doing, because we're just wasting our time. We cannot see them clearly. So let me target all the div elements, give them a padding of 20 pixels, background of slate blue, right, and gap of 5 pixels. Let me give it 20 actually. Okay, so there we go. Oh, sorry, I'm going to define the gap on the container actually. That's it. Now let me take this. Let me make it smaller so that we can see what we are doing. Okay. So as you can see, the side columns fit their content, right? The middle column takes the remaining space, and that's how it works, right? So I think that's pretty much for grid template columns. So for creating columns, now we can also define the rows. So these ones, right? Now let's control our row heights. Let's say, okay, so the way we do this is we come here and define it. So just like we define grid template columns, we also have grid template rows. Okay, so like this. And the repeat function also works on grid template rows. So let's say 1FR, 3FR, 1FR. Okay, can you see that? So the first row is one fractional unit. So this the one in the center takes three fractional units out of the container, right? So it takes up the remaining space. So it multiplies one fractional unit times 3 and it takes that space. Okay. And you can also say, maybe let's say, as you can see, this is perfect for a home page. So the first one here, header, this one is content, and this one, so the last one is footer, right? You can also create an empty space like that. Okay, you see that it added another empty column for us. So this will be really good. This will be really important when we started spanning across columns and rows. So for now, all I need is to show you how this works. Okay, so I hope you understand this one. Like I told you, the grid, the repeat function also works on grid template rows, right? So let's say 5 times 1FR. Okay, can you see that it created 5 different rows for us, right? Okay, so this is how grid template rows work. So let me just leave this here like this. Okay, and you can also toggle to show the track sizes, so the size of the columns. You can see this one is 1FR, 1FR, and this one is auto, right? So the size of each column and the size of each row. So this one is 3FR, as you can see here, and it's auto, so it takes up 48 pixels. So the last one here, this 4, it takes up 48 pixels, right? So this is how it works, but that's not necessary. We don't need it for now. Okay. Okay, now let's learn how to position items exactly where we want them. Okay. Now I'm going to comment out this example too. Okay. I just did it to demonstrate the grid template rows and columns. Okay. So let's say let's create a container with the class of layout grid. Okay. So I'm going to create dot header, which has a text header, right? And then sidebar for the sidebar, and then actually let me format the document. Okay, there we go. So let's add content, and let's say main content, right? Let's say footer. Okay, now let's set up our grid structure. So let's get back to the CSS and take this, the layout grid, right? This is the class we give the container, right? So let's make it a grid container by displaying it to grid. Okay, also let's display them here. Okay, now let me style the element, the divs inside of it. Let's say layout grid div. So I'm going to target all of them, right? Let's say padding of 1 rem. Okay, and background, so our old friends red blue, color white, and then yeah, I think that's all. So let me take this down here. Okay, okay, so now let's create 3 columns: sidebar, main, content, and some extra space. Okay, so let's say grid template columns. Let's give the header 80 pixels, right? And then 1FR for the main content and the sidebar, and 100 pixels for the footer. Okay, can you see that? Now let's add some spacing between them. Okay, now let's make a container here full height. So I'm going to give it a height of 100 vh so that you see it clearly. Okay, now let's position our header to span all elements. So we want our header to go from here. It should span the whole view width, right? So the viewport width. So it should go full width. So what we could do is select our header, and there you could achieve this is we have these properties called grid column start and grid column end. So grid column start by default is it's in one, right? This is why we want it to start, and we want it to end excuse me, we want it to end in here 4. So this is the purpose of these line numbers. Okay, so we can track where we want to span our columns, right? So how many columns you want to span? So let's say 4, not 14, 4. Okay, can you see that? Now it takes up the full width, right? So this is how we do it. But as you might guess, we also have the shorthand property for this. Okay, so let's comment out this one. So the shorthand property is grid column, just like that. So we want it to start from 1 and then /4. See, now it does the same thing, right? So the numbers that you can see, they refer to grid lines, right? They are not columns. So as you can see, with 3 columns we have 4 lines, right? If you are to say it should span 3 grid lines, you can see it now stopped here, right? So this is how it works. So you need to turn on the grid overlay in your browser DevTools when you're practicing this. Okay, so now let's position our sidebar in the first column and second row. Okay, so select the sidebar and let's give it a column of 1. Okay, yeah, I think that's all. Let's give it a grid row of 2. So grid row 2, right? I hope you're seeing it. Let me take this down a little bit, right? So now, as you can see, the main content, it goes in column 2, right? So it's in column 2, row 2, right? Now we want our footer to span all columns in the last row, right? So select the footer just like the header. So let's say grid column should be 1 and then /4. Okay, that's it. Now let's add some. Actually, let me add this side, but we want this side back, the main content. So not this one. So we want our main content to span across, right? So you want it to right now it started from 2, right? Row 2, column 2. So let's select it. What's the class name? So it's content, not main content. So content, we want the grid column to be 2/4. Okay, yeah, there you go. So it goes from 2 to 4, right? So the next thing, I think that's all, right? I think that's all we need for this. So as you can see, we have our layout here with header spanning the full width and sidebar and main content and footer. Even though this is just some blue boxes, but still it kind of makes sense, right? In a real world layout. So we have the sidebar in the side like that, and the header and the main content in the middle, right? So there is this keyword I want you to know. So the span keyword, which is often easier to understand, right? So instead of using 2 to 4 like that, you can say span 2. Okay, span 4, sorry. Can you see that? They all does the same job, but at least you need to know them, right? At least you need to know that it also exists, right? So we also have this thing. So what I wanted to show you is the responsive grid techniques, right? CSS Grid makes responsive design incredibly easy, as I've told you in the beginning of this video. So let me show you the most powerful techniques. So auto fit and min-max magic, right? Right now I'm going to comment out the HTML for this layout again. I hope you're understanding what I'm doing. So actually let me comment them out. We have some space. Uh, there you go. So let's say I'm going to name our container responsive cards, and let's say I'm going to create 6 cards actually. Okay, so times 6, hit enter, and now we have 6 with the class of card, right? So let me show you the magic formula for responsive grids. Let's get back to our CSS. Select the responsive grid, or sorry, responsive cards, right? Let's make the grid container. Okay, now we need to go back and turn on our grid, right? Okay, so right now we can see them all, right? So let's select the card, give it a padding of 20 pixels, background of slate. Oh, sorry, I think you might have noticed the mistake. Background of slate blue, color of white, and some gap. Okay, so let's say grid, where's our container? So this one here, let me take it down. Okay, so let's say let's create grid template columns, repeat. So the first keyword here is the auto fit, right? Auto fit like this, and then the min max keyword. Okay, so the minimum should be 250 pixels and the maximum is 1 fr. Okay, can you see that it automatically created grids for us? Now let me break down what just happened. So the repeat function creates multiple columns, right? The auto fit creates as many columns as can fit in the width of the container, right? And the min max function, each column is at least 250 pixels, but it can grow, right? So that is what min max does. Now let's add some spacing. Oh, as you might have noticed, I have made the same mistake over and over. So adding the gap property in the cat. Okay, there we go. So let's say now, as you can see, there are just two columns, right? Let me make this full width, and you can see the magic. Can you see it? So we said that the minimum width of those cards should be 250 pixels, right? And the maximum is 1 fr. So it can grow to whatever size, right? So you can see they are pretty responsive, right? So on tablets 760, you can see they get back to two columns, and on mobiles they get back to one column, right? So I think that's really powerful actually, right? Okay, so right now let me show you how to combine CSS grid with media queries. Media queries are something that I haven't introduced you to yet, right? So I've told you we are going to cover CSS grid, then animations, then responsive web design, right? And then we build a couple of projects before we move to JavaScript. This is my plan for you guys, okay? So you might be wondering what I thought to bring this. So what I clicked to get us to this responsive toggler here, where we can see the responsiveness. So we have this icon here, right? As you can see, you can toggle the device toolbar, so you can turn it on or off. Okay, so I think I've shown you what I wanted to show you here. Now let me show you how to create responsive grids using media query for more control, right? So let's get back to our HTML and create another example. Okay, so let me comment this out and wrap it. Okay, so let's say I'm going to name this, let's say adaptive layout. So like this, right? So let's say dot cut again, dot cut, and then number sign and dollar sign, sorry, let's say 6. Okay, so as you can see, they have already inherited the styles here. So these dot cut styles that are here, right? So let's say dot adaptive cards is the class name, right? Adaptive layout, sorry. So you can see this is just to show you that even the pros can make mistakes in coding, right? Mistakes is part of the game. So let's make it a grid container. Okay, so now what we want is for mobile first. So when it's on mobile, we want it to be one column only, right? So one fr like this, and also let's give it a gap of 1 rem. Okay, so what we want is for tablets and up, right? You want them to be in 2 columns, right? So like this, at media max width. So for tablet is 768 pixels, right? So when it's on this size, select the adaptive layout, and let's say grid template columns 2 times 1 fr. Okay, can you see that? And we also, when it's on desktop, so desktop and larger than that, so let's say media max width. So for desktop it starts around 1024 pixels, right? Sorry, pixels. Okay, so we want our adaptive layout to be 3 columns, right? So let's say, okay, so right now this is the view. I think I've made a mistake here. That's really a stupid mistake, and it's, I think, instead of min width, I went and added max width all over the place. So let me start from here, and let's say I'm going to select both of them and say min instead. Okay, there we go. So on tablets, as you can see, we have 2 columns, right? So on laptop we have 3 columns. Okay, so this is how they works. Can you see that? That's pretty cool, right? As you can see, CSS Grid is by far the most powerful layout system in CSS. I'm just proving this to you right now. Okay, so this is it. Now let me tell you about grid alignment and justification too. So just like in Flexbox, we also have align and justify items, justify properties in CSS Grid. Okay, so I'm going to close this for now, and let's say, actually, I'm going to comment out the complete example. Okay, So let's wrap it through. Okay, so let's say alignment demo, right? So let's create a div with just numbers inside of it. So I want 4 div elements. Okay, now let's get back to our CSS. I hope you're understanding what I'm doing. So alignment demo, right? Display to grid. So alignment demo, I will target, sorry, not demo. I will target all the div elements. So those are our first child elements. Okay, so let's say padding of 20 pixels, right? Background of, yeah, let's just use black this time. So background of white. Okay, I think that's all we need for that. So let's add some gap here. So I'm going to add a gap of 1 rem. Okay, so let's say grid, let's create our column. Let's say grid template columns. We need, actually we need 2 columns, right? With 200 pixels each. So their width should be 200 pixels each, right? And also grid template rows. Okay, there you go. So now let's make the container larger than the grid. Okay, so let's say, so where is our container? This is our container, right? So let's give it a height of 500 pixels. Actually, let me add border of 1 pixel. Solid reds are all found in the older videos. Okay, so height of 500 pixels and width of 600 pixels. Okay, so that we can actually see how this works. So right now we can center the entire grid horizontally if we want. So the way we do this is just justify content, right? So center, and you can see they are centered, right? You also have the align content instead of align items. So in grid it's align content. Sorry, I'm there writing align content center. Okay, can you see the magic? Can you see how it works? You can also use space distribution just like in Flexbox. So instead of center, you can say space between. Okay, can you see that? We also have the space around. You can use all those, they are the same. Okay, so you can also align individual items. So what I want to show you is the self alignment, right, for individual items. So let's say, actually let me add some class here. And this one, let's say, let's give it a class of let's say special, right? So let's say dot special, right? Let's say justify self and okay. Can you see that? You can also say start, and you can also say center, right? And also we have the aligns self. So we have the start, we have center, and we also have end, right? Actually, in order for you to see this, I think, yeah, I think that's okay. I don't want to make this video longer. Okay. So you can also say, if you want to center it, for example, you can just say plus self, right? So let's say center or end or start, right? And this is something that I didn't show you for this here. So instead of doing justify and this thing, let's say you want to center them, you can say justify. Okay, so can you see that? uh where's the problem? I don't know what the hell is the problem here, but anyway, let me off this. Okay, so right here, okay, so justify content center, line item center. So there is a shorthand property that you can use for this. You can say place items start or center, right, or end. So we have all these properties. They are all available actually. Okay, so I think that's pretty much for justification and alignment. Okay, so now let's move to grid areas. Okay, so I'm going to comment out this. We don't need it again. Okay, so grid areas let you name sections of your grid for cleaner cut, right? So instead of writing grid column start and stuff like that, actually let me just create the HTML first. So let's say dot named grid as the name of our container. Let's say header and header again, right? So let's say nav dot sidebar and then sidebar. Okay, sorry, navigation, right? So let's add the main content to main dot content, and let's say main content for the text. Okay, let's add a site for ads. Site class. So for some things like advertisement ads, right? Like this. Okay, let's also create a footer with a class of footer. Okay, there we go. Now let's set up our grid structure in our CSS. So here let's say dot named grid. Let's make it a grid container first. Okay, let's define the columns. So grid template columns, and let's say 200 pixels, 1FR, 150 pixels. Okay, let me style the items there first. So the child elements. So let's select the header, main, aside, nav, footer. That's all right. Header, nav, main, aside, footer. Okay, let me format it. There you go. So I'm going to give them some best styles. So padding of 20 pixels, font size of 1.4 m, font size of 1.4 m, right? And let's give it a BG of slate blue. Okay. Okay. Now let me define the rows. Let me add some. Let me make the text white. I think it looks better. Okay. So let's define the grid template rows. Sorry, not columns. So grid template rows. Okay. So the first row you want it to be 80 pixels, and the second one should be 1FR and then 60 pixels. Okay. Now here is the magic. Let's name our grid areas. So the property is like this. So grid template areas. Okay. So let's say you want the first one to be the first column to be this. So you want the header to span full width, right? We have 3 columns there, so it should span the full columns, right? And then sidebar, then content, then ads, right? And then the last one is footer. So you want it also to span full width, right? So this, as you can see, it creates a visual map of our layout, right? Let me add some gaps so that we should see what we are doing. So gap 15 pixels. Okay, I think that's too much. Just maybe 3 pixels will do. Okay, so for our container, let's give it a height of 100 vh, Okay, now let's assign elements to these areas. So select, the way you do this is you select the header. It has a class of header, right? And then the way we assign it is using the grid area property. So grid area header. Okay, can you see that? Okay, as you might notice, our header did not span the full width. So what might be the actually, let me turn on our little grid icon here so that we should see what's going on. Okay, we have this empty space here, right? So let's fill the column there with header again. Okay, now here let's say content and then ads, right? And let's say footer. Okay, now it's complete, right? So can you see our layout? Our layout now looks, as we can see, our layout now looks beautiful without having to write all these grid column start, grid column end, and stuff like that. We just need to create the visual map for the design. So for the columns, you first define the rows and columns, then you come and do it. You define the visual map using the grid template areas, right? And then you assign each element to its grid area. I think this is incredibly useful, right? So this code is more maintainable than the other one. Okay, I think that's pretty much for this video. And there you have it. You now have comprehensive knowledge of the most powerful layout system in CSS. So right now it might look like you have done nothing, right? Like I think it's weird. We haven't created a lot of stuff today, but I promise there will be 2 project-based tutorials coming your way in the next couple of days. So you need to practice everything we have done in this video so far. Okay, so let me recap what we have covered today. So we covered what CSS Grid is and why it's amazing for layouts. We also learned how to create grids with display grid, and we defined columns with grid template columns. We also learned about grid template rows for height control and the gap properties, positioning as items exactly where we want them with. So using the grid column and grid row, right? We also created responsive layouts with auto fit and min-max, right? We also aligned content perfectly with justify and align properties, right? So the beauty of CSS Grid is we have also covered grid areas actually, so the last one, right? So the beauty of CSS Grid, like I told you, is that it solves complex layout problems with simple and readable code. No more floods, no more positioning. I think I didn't even teach you about floods because they are the they are the old school way actually. We no longer use it. No developer currently use floods, I think. So no more layout frustrations. Alright, so over the next few days, we are putting all this knowledge into practice. First, we will build a complete responsive website layout using CSS Grid. Then we'll create a stunning portfolio gallery. Then finally, we'll combine CSS Grid and Flexbox to create the ultimate layout system that handles any design challenge. If this comprehensive guide helped you understand CSS Grid, smash that like button and let me know in the comments which grid technique impressed you the most. Subscribe to the channel because those upcoming project tutorials are going to be incredible and you'll want to apply everything we learned today. Now go experiment with these techniques, create some grids, play around with the properties, and I'll see you tomorrow for our first CSS Grid project where we build something amazing together. So goodbye and happy coding.